The first thing I felt was the cold. It wasn't the ordinary chill of a winter night, or the bite of a draft through a cracked window. This was a deep, bone-aching cold that seemed to live inside my very marrow, a phantom memory of icy water filling my lungs, of darkness pressing in from all sides. I shot upright in bed, gasping for air, my hand flying to my chest to feel the frantic, reassuring thump of my heart. It was beating. I was alive. For a long moment, I just sat there in the darkness of my bedchamber, trembling. The silk of my nightgown was damp with sweat, and the air was thick with the scent of sandalwood incense I hadn't smelled in years. My eyes rotted around the room, taking in the familiar arsa-arved rosewood furniture, the painted screen in the corner, the moonlight spilling through the latticed window. This was my room, my old room, the room I had shared with him before everything fell apart, before he pushed me. A soft knock on the door made me flinch. "Lady, are you awake?" I heard you cry out. It was Kyre, my maidservant, her voice young and worried. A wave of emotion so powerful it almost choked me washed over me. Kyre. She had died trying to defend me against the Concubine's people. Her throat had been cut right in front of me. "I'm fine, Queer," I managed to say, my voice harass and unfamiliar to my own ears. "Go back to sleep. I just had a dream." I heard her hesitate, then her soft footsteps retreating. Only when she was gone did I allow myself to collapse back against the pillows, staring up at the canopy above. I closed my eyes, forcing myself to remember. The last thing I saw before the blackness took me was his face, Gu Changyuan, my husband. His features were twisted with a mixture of disgust and impatience as he looked down at me, my hands scrabbling uselessly against the slick ice at the edge of the frigid lake. I had been crying his child, and he had pushed me in because his precious concubine had whispered that I was a threat. My eyes snapped open, a new emotion, sharp, cut through the terror and confusion. It was so pure and cold it felt like the ice of that lake had been transplanted into my veins. I had been a fool, a trusting, loving, pathetic fool who had given everything to a man who saw me as nothing more than a stepping stone. I had shared my mother's story with his poor, orphan cousin. I had defended her to my family. I had smiled and nodded when he brought her into our home as a concubine, believing his lies that she was just a helpless girl who needed our protection. I swung my legs over the side of the bed, my bare feet touching the cold floor. I walked to the dressing table and sat down, staring at the reflection in the bronze mirror. A young woman stared back, too, with a delicate oval face, pale skin, dark eyes that were currently wide with a dawning, terrible clarity. This was me, Shenyu. Reborn. Sent back to the day everything truly began to unravel. I knew what was coming. In just a few hours, Gu Changyuan would come in with a cup of warm ginger tea, his expression one of practiced concern. He would tell me he had had a bad dream and was worried about me. He would sit on the edge of the bed and gently stroke my hair, murmuring reassurances. Then, as the day wore on, he would casually mention that his cousin Lu Yunru was arriving that very afternoon. She had been mistreated by her stepmother, he would say, his voice dripping with false sympathy. She had nowhere else to go, he would ask me, his doting wife, to take care of her. I watched my reflection's lips curl into a smile that didn't reach my eyes. It was a cold, calculating smile, a smile that the old Shen Yu would never have been capable of. "Not this time," I whispered to my reflection, "not this time, Changyuan." The anger was a steady fire in my gut, but it was banked by a new, sharper intelligence. I couldn't just scream at him or refuse. That would only make him suspicious, and he was not a stupid man. He was a rising star in the Hanlin Academy, a scholar with a brilliant future. His reputation was everything to him, and I had to be smarter than he was. I had to play his game, but with my own set of rules, true to my memory. The door slid open just as dawn was painting the sky a pale peach. Gu Changyuan entered, holding a porcelain cup. He was just as I remembered him, tall, slender, with a face so handsome it could have been carved from jade. His eyes were the color of amber, and they were always soft when he looked at me, or at least, they used to be. Now I saw the cold calculation lurking beneath the surface. "You," he said, his voice a gentle murmur. "You're awake. I heard you cry out in the night. Are you feeling unwell? I brought you some ginger tea to warm your body." I watched him approach, my heart pounding a steady rhythm against my ribs. The old Shen Yu would have felt a flutter of warmth at his concern. The new Shen Yu felt only revulsion. He sat on the edge of the bed, his long, elegant fingers reaching out to brush a stray strand of hair from my face. His touch was light, almost reverent. I had to fight the urge to flinch away from him. "Thank you, my lord," I said, my voice purposely soft and a little breathless, mimicking the tone I had used in my past life. I reached for the cup, my fingers brushing his skin was no arm. I remembered the coldness of his hands on my back as he pushed me. I took the cup and, with a motion that looked perfectly natural, allowed my hand to twitch, as if a sudden chill had seized my muscles. The cup tilted, and the dewy arm ginger tea spilled, not onto his lap, but onto the expensive silk of his robe, ruining the seriful embroidery near his knee. He jumped back with a sharp hiss, his face twisting for a split second into a mask of annoyance. "What?" He caught himself, the anger vanishing as quickly as it had appeared, replaced by that manufactured concern. It's nothing. Don't worry about me. Are you alright? Did the hot liquid scald you?" I looked at him, my eyes wide and apologetic. "I'm so sorry, my lord. I was just so stay-rawled by your kindness. My hands are still trembling from the nightmare I had. Please forgive me." I even managed to muster a few tears, letting them pool in my eyes and threaten to spill down my cheeks. His face instantly softened. This was the performance he was used to. Dependent wife who needed his strength. "It's alright, he said, waving away my apologies. "I was just an accident. I will go change my clothes." He stood, brushing at the stain with a look of distaste. "I had something I wanted to discuss with you. My cousin Lu Yunru is coming to stay with us for a while. She has been through a great deal of hardship. And I cannot be to see a family member suffer. You understand, don't you, my kind?" Gentle it was, the opening gambit. I lowered my head, letting my hair fall over my face to hide the glittering triumph in my eyes. "Of course, my lord. Your family is my family. I will have the Western courtyard prepper read for her. She will have everything she needs." Relief and a self-satisfied smugness flickered across his face. He had expected a fight, I could tell. He had prepared arguments and justifications. My easy agreement took the wind out of his sails. "You are truly a treasure, he said, leaning in to place a kiss on my forehead. I held my breath, not wanting to feel his lips on my skin. "I knew I could count on you." He left, finally to have his robe cleaned, leaving me alone with the bitter taste of his false affection. The moment he was gone, I dropped the pretense. My hands were no longer trembling, they were steady. I went to my dressing table and opened the secret compartment in the back of the bottom drawer. Inside, wrapped in a scourie of red silk, was a pair of solid gold bracelets, intricately wrought with twisting vines. They were the last gift my mother had given me before she died. In my past life, Lu Yunru had admired them, and I, wanting to be a good sister, had lent them to her. She had never returned them. Instead, she had worn them to a flower viewing banquet, letting everyone believe they had been a gift from her generous lover. I wouldn't make that mistake again. I wouldn't lend her a single pin. I slipped the bracelets onto my own wrist, the cool gold settling against my skin like an armor. Then I changed into a plain, unassuming gown and wrapped a dark cloak around my shoulders. I was going to leave the manor. For the first time in a long time, I was going to do something for myself. The streets of the capital were just waking up as I slipped out the servants' gate. I had avoided Gu Changjuan's personal guardies and bribed a young kitchen boy to tell me when the coast was clear. I walked quickly, keeping my head down, until I reached the bustling entertainment district. It was here, in one of the tea houses, that I knew a poetical storyteller held court. He was famous for his tales, but even more famous for his price. I found him, an old man named Zhang, nursing a cup of tea in the back room. I placed a bag of silver, the sum of my meager personal allowance, on the table. It was a week's earnings for a man like him. "I have a story for you, Master Zhang," I said, my voice low. "I want you to tell it in every tea house, from here to the city gates." He raised an eyebrow, his shrewd eyes glinting. "Rich tale, is it, miss?" He wasn't fooled by my plain clothes. "Rich enough to buy you this?" I said, pointing to the silver. "And richer still, because it's true. It's a story about a renowned scholar in the Hanlin Academy who lives in a fine manor. A scholar who has a noble, kindly wife, a beautiful, weeping cousin he just brought into his home, claiming she's a poor, orphaned girl." I watched Master Zhang's expression shift from greed to pure, professional interest. "Go on, miss. I'm listening." "It's a story about a scholar who uses his wife's dowry to dress his new cousin in silks and jade," I continued, my voice steady. It's about a man who makes his wife look a fool while he sets up his beloved in a separate courtyard, showering her with gifts and telling everyone she's just a harmless relative. This is a delicate matter, Miss Master Zhang murmured, stroking his BR. Accusing a man of the Hanlin Academy, that's dangerous talk. I'm not accusing him, I said, leaning forward. I'm just telling a story. A story that everyone in the city is going to be whispering about by nightfall. My story. I let the meaning of that sink in. He was a smummer. He knew I wasn't just any maid. I was the wronged wife. The one people would sympathize with. Spread the word for me, and I will make sure you are the only one telling this particular version for the next 3 days. After that, the details might change. Master Zhang looked at the silver, then at my resolute face. He chuckled, a dry, raspy sound. You've got a clever mind, miss, and a bitter one. This'll make for a fine tale. The scholar and his 2 wives, one a jewel, the other's a cuckoo in the nest. It'll sell well. I'll have it on the bow rods by this afternoon. I left the tea house feeling lighter than I had in days. I had planted a seed, a rumor, and rumors were like weeds. They grew in the dar, and they were almost impossible to root out. Gu Changyuan read about his reputation more than anything else. That was where I would strike first. It wasn't the final blow, not even close, but it was the first cut. As I walked back toward the Gu Manor, my mind churning with plans, I took a shortcut through a Nana Row alley, a path I remembered from my youth. It was a mistake. I was so focused on my thoughts, on my brilliant calculated revenge, that I didn't see the figure on horseback until it was too late. I walked straight into the side of a massive Cody. The animal huffed in surprise, sidestepping, and I stumbled back, my foot catching on a loose cobblestone. I braced myself for the hard impact of the ground. It never came. Instead, a strong hand shot out and clamped around my wrist, hauling me upright with such force that I was yanked against a hard body. The scent of sandalwood and something shea-arper, like pine, enveloped me. I looked up, my heart hammering in my chest, and found myself staring into a pair of eyes so dark they were almost black. Framed by long lashes, the face was handsome, with sharp cheekbones and a thin, unsmiling mouth. This was no scholar. This man radiated a quiet, dangerous authority. Watch where you're going, he said, his voice a low Seoul baritone. His grip on my wrist was like iron, and he made no move to release me. I'm sorry, my lord, I stammered, trying to pull my arm free. I was still rattled from the knee fall and the shock of being so suddenly manhandled. I glanced at his clothes, practical riding. But the fabric was of a quality that rivaled even the best in the palace. A nobleman, a powerful one. Sorry won't fix it if you get yourself killed, he said, his eyes sweeping over me with a cold disinterest that was almost insulting. You're running from something, or someone. It wasn't a question. It's none of your concern, I retorted, finally managing to yank my wrist from his grasp. The sudden motion unsteadied me, and I stumbled back a step. The alley wall stopped my fall, and the rough stones scraped through my cloak, catching on my sleeve. I heard a distinct, ripping sound. I looked down to see the fine silk of my sleeve had been torn open, from my wrist to my elbow. Wonderful, I muttered, glow a ring at the man. Thank you for that. Your help has been truly invaluable. A flicker of something like amusement crossed his face. It was there and gone so fast I almost missed it. You're quite the handful, he observed, dismounting with a single fluid motion. He was taller than Gu Changyuan, and more powerfully built. He stepped closer to me, and I instinctively pressed myself against the cold, dirty. He didn't stop until he was standing directly in front of me, so close I could feel the heat radiating from his body. You tore your own sleeve, he said, his voice dropping even lower, but you still owe me a debt. I gaped at him. A debt? For what? For not letting you break your neck on the street, he said, his gaze dropping to my torn sleeve, then to the panic in my eyes, and finally to my lips. For being so clumsy. He reached out, his long fingers brushing the torn edge of my sleeve. The touch was feather light, but it sent a jolt through my entire body. And for trying to run away. Before I could say a word, he closed the remaining distance between us. He didn't kiss me, not really. He pressed his lips to the corner of my mouth, a brief, shocking brush of skin against skin, so sudden and so intimate that my mind simply went blank. I froze, unable to move, unable to breathe. He pulled back just as quickly, his eyes now holding a dangerous, glittering light. That's your interest on the debt, he murmured, his breath warm against my cheek. For now, I'll be seeing you again, little spy. He stepped back, remounted his horse, and with a click of his tongue, he was gone, riding out the other end of the alley as silently as he had read. I stood there against the wall, my hand pressed to my lips, my heart slamming against my ribs like a caged bird. Who was that man? And what had just happened? I stumbled back to the Gu manor, my body trembling with a mixture of fear and a strange, unwanted. I had no idea that the man in the alley was Shi Jingwei, the cold and fier-Retiroquois of Zhenbei. A man whose name was whispered in the same breath as the emperor's secrets. A man who held the power of life and death in his hands. And I had no idea that our paths would cross again, in the most dangerous way possible. The rumors spread through the capital like wildfire, just as I had hoped. By the time the sun reached its zenith, the tea houses were abuzz with the tale of the virtuous scholar R and his 2 wives. The details had been embellished, of course. Master Zhang was a professional. In his version, the scholar R was not just a man with a cousin, he was a serpent in silk robes, using his gentle wife's fortune to build a nest for a viper. The wife was a paragon of patience, a woman so good and trusting that she was blind to the betrayal happening under her own roof. I heard the whispers myself when I sent Kyra out to buy embroidery thread. She returned with wide eyes and a flustered expression, reporting that everyone on the street was talking about a certain Hanlin scholar R, who lived on Lotus Lane. They say he's a scoundrel, my lady, she whispered, her voice trembling. They say he has 2 wives and he mistreats the first one. They say he uses her money to buy gifts for the second one. I kept my face perfectly neutral, but inside I was smiling. The seed had taken root. Now, all I had to do was wait for Gu Changyuan to hear the gossip. He was a man obsessed with appearances. The mere suggestion of impropriety would send him into a quiet, seething rage. He would come to me, demanding to know what I had done, and I would look at him with wide, innocent eyes and ask him what he was talking about. Let him wonder, let him suspect. It was the first step in dismantling the pedestal on which he had placed himself. He returned home earlier than usual that evening, his face a carefully controlled mask. He went straight to his study, but the tension in his shoulders, the way his jaw was clenched, told me everything I needed to know. I was in my small sitting room, pretending to read a poetry scroll. When he finally read, he didn't knock. He just slid the door open and stood there, looking at me with an expression I couldn't quite decipher. You, he said, his voice deceptively calm. I heard the most curious thing today, a story about a scholar. A rather unflattering story. I set down the scroll and looked up at him, my face a perfect mask of innocent confusion. A story? What kind of story, my lord? He entered the room, closing the door behind him with a soft click that felt like the closing of a cage. A story that seems to know an awful lot about our household. Our arrangements with Lu Yunru. He walked over to where I was sitting and stood before me, forcing me to crane my neck to look up at him. People are saying things nasty, things that could ruin me. I blinked, letting my eyes fill with a practiced uncertainty. I don't understand, my lord. What are people saying? Who would say such things? You are the most honorable man I know. He watched my face, looking for any hint of deception. I held his, letting him see only the wide-eyed, knave wife he had married. He was good at reading people, I knew that, but I had 3 years of his lies to study. I knew his tells. The slight twitch at the corner of his mouth when he was lying, the way his eyes would rot to the left when he was planning something. I had ran to emulate that same innocence, to mirror it back at him. The rumors stirred in the tea houses, he said. Finally, the tension in his shoulders easing just a fraction. They say I am keeping a concubine and starving my wife. They say I am a thief of my own wife's property. It's absurd, of course, but these rumors, they could hurt my standing at the Hanlin Academy. My reputation is everything. I stood up, placing a gentle hand on his arm. The touch made my skin crawl, but I forced myself to maintain the contact. Then we must stop them, my lord. Whoever is spreading these lies is a wicked person. I paused, tilting my head as if a thought had just occurred to me. Perhaps it is related to the arrival of Yunru. People are always suspicious of newcomers, especially beautiful ones. Maybe if she were to show herself in society, to prove she is just a humble relative, the rumors would stop. He looked at me, and I could see the wheels turning in his head. The suggestion was a calculated one. If he rated Lu Yunru around as his cousin, it would either confirm or deny the rumors. depending on how she was perceived. If she was meek and unassuming, the rumors might die down. But if she was too bold, too proud, it would only fan the flames. It was a gamble for him, and I knew he hated gambling. He considered my proposal for a long moment. "You would be willing to do that?" he asked, a note of genuine surprise in his voice. "To introduce her to your circle?" I smiled, my most loving and trusting smile. "Of course, my lord, she is your family. She is my family now too. I want nothing more than for her to be happy, and for the world to see you for the honorable man you array." The words tasted like ash in my mouth. He was convinced. I could see the relief wash over him. He pulled me into a quick embrace, and I held myself rigidly still, letting him hug me without returning the affection. "You array a true wife." "You," he murmured against my hair. "Pa all among women." He released me, his mood visibly improved. "I will have Yunru prep for the mid-autumn banquet. We will show the city that she is nothing more than a poor relation taken in out of the kindness of our Hie arts." What he didn't know was that I had already sent a message to Master Zhang, giving him the second PA rot of the story. The PA rot where Lu Yunru would attend the banquet in borrowed finery, ring jewels purchased with my dowry, the PART where she would be seen and judged by the very people whose opinions mattered most to Gu Changyuan. I wasn't just introducing her to society, I was throwing her to the wolves. The days leading up to the mid-autumn banquet were a blur of preparations. I oversaw the decorations, the menu, the seating arrangements. I made sure that Lu Yunru's place was prominent, right beside Gu Changyuan, a spot that was traditionally reserved for the first wife. It was a subtle, deliberate insult, one that would be noticed by every Shie-eyed matron in the capital. I also made sure her gown was exquisite, made of the finest silk I could order from my own accounts. It would be a beautiful gown, the envy of every woman there, and everyone would know who had paid for it. On the night of the banquet, the Gu Manor was a sea of lanterns and laughter. The guests arrived in a steady stream, ministers and their wives, scholars and their families, the cream of the capital's elite. I stood at the entrance with Gu Changyuan, greeting each guest with a serene smile. Lu Yunru was behind me, dressed in the pale pink silk I had chosen for her. She was beautiful, I couldn't deny that. Her face was a perfect oval, her eyes wide and doe-like, her figure slim and delicate. She looked like a gentle flower, fragile and in need of protection. It was the very image she cultivated. The banquet proceeded smoothly. I sat in my designated place, directly opposite Chengjuan and Lu Yunru. The food was exquisite, the wine flowed freely, and the conversation was lively. But I was watching. I was always watching. I saw how Lu Yunru leaned slightly toward Gu Chengjuan, how she touched his aram when she spoke, how she looked at him with adoring eyes. I saw how Gu Changyuan's gaze lingered on her, how his voice softened when he addressed her. The performance was infuriatingly convincing, but the true entertainment was yet to come. As the evening wore on, I noticed a new arrival, a tall, broad-shouldered man in a simple dark robe. He had arrived late, and he had made no announcement of his name. The servants seemed flustered by his presence, unsure whether to admit him. He simply walked in, his dark eyes surveying the room with a calm, unbothered authority. I recognized him immediately. It was the man from the alley, the one who had pressed his lips to the corner of my mouth and called me a spy. My breath caught in my throat. What was he doing here? He was no scholar, no bureaucrat. He looked like a soldier, a man of action, not of words. He was dressed simply, but the quality of his robe was unmistakable. He wasn't here to impress. He was here because he wanted to be. And the way he was looking at me, his gaze cutting through the crowd to find me, made my blood run cold. He made his way toward the main table, and Gu Changyuan, ever the gracious host, rose to greet him. "My lord," he said, bowing polite. "We'era, honored by your presence. Might I ask your name?" The man's lips curved into a faint, almost insolent smile. "Jingwei," he said, the name dropping into the room like a stone into still water. I was in the neighborhood. There was a party. The effect was instantaneous. The room seemed to hold its collective breath. Siam Mine Requise of Zhenbei, the emperor's right hand, a man of terrifying power and cold ruthlessness. The whispers stirred immediately, a susurrus of shock and speculation. What was he doing here? Why had he come to the modest home of a Hanlin scholar? Gu Changyuan's face went pale, then flushed a deep red. He was flustered, completely unprepared for the presence of such a high-ranking nobleman. He stumbled through his words, offering Shi Jingwei the seat of honor next to him. Shi Jingwei ignored the offer, his eyes fixed on me. "I would rather sit here," he said, pointing to the empty space beside me. With the lady of the house, if she will permit it. The room was silent, all eyes turned to me. I felt the heat rise to my cheeks, but I forced myself to remain composed. You honor us, my lord, I said, my voice steady. Join us. He sat down beside me. So close I could feel the heat of his body. He leaned, his voice dropping to a whisper that only I could hear. You look different tonight, little spy. More, I like it. I kept my eyes fixed on the table, refusing to acknowledge his words. But I couldn't ignore the effect his presence had on the room. The guests were whispering, the matrons were steering, and Gu Changyuan's face was a mask of ba relay controlled fury. The rumors about the Scala R and his 2 wives would be forgotten in an instant. The new rumor would be about the Emerquise of Junbei, and the neglected wife of a minor official. It was a much more dangerous rumor, and it was a rumor I had inadvertently rotted simply by being seated near him. Lu Yunru, sensing the shift in attention, decided to seize the moment. She rose from her seat, a graceful, flowing motion, and walked over to where Si Jingwei was sitting. My lord, she said, her voice as sweet. I am Lu Yunru, the humble cousin of the house. I have heard so much about you. Your reputation as a military genius is legendary. It is truly an honor to meet you. Shi Jingwei Borelli glanced at her. I'm sure it is, he said, his tone flat. He turned back to me. I came to retrieve something I left behind the other day, he said, his voice still pitched for my ears only. A kiss. You owe me another one. Remember my face burned? I owe you nothing. My lord, I hissed under my breath. You took that from me without my consent. He chuckled. A low, dark sound that sent a shiver down my spine. I always collect my debts, but I'll be patient. For now. He reached under the table and placed his hand over mine. His palm was warm and calloused, the hand of a man who had wielded a sword more often than a brush. I tried to pull away, but his grip was firm. He held my hand, his thumb tracing a slow, deliberate circle on my palm. It was a small gesture, ba really noticeable to anyone else, but to me, it was a declaration, a claim, and to Chang Yuan, who was watching with round, jealous eyes, it was a provocation. The night was spiraling out of control, and I was at the center of it all. The tension was unbearable. I was trapped between a husband I was plotting to destroy and a man I really knew, who seemed to have decided I belonged to him. My plan was still in motion, still meticulously crafted, but the unexpected appearance of Shi Jingwei had thrown a wrench into everything. He was a wild cur, a dangerous variable I had never accounted for. The banquet continued, but the atmosphere had changed. The earlier joviality was gone, replaced by a tense, watchful silence. I could feel the eyes on me, speculating, judging. The matrons were whispering behind their fans, their gazes sharp with newfound interest. Gu Changyuan's smile was a brittle, painful, and Lu Yunru's face was pinched with really concealed jealousy. She had tried to capture Si Jingwei's attention, and had been dismissed as if she were nothing more than a servant. Jingwei, meanwhile, seemed utterly unconcerned. He ate his meal with calm deliberation, occasionally leaning in to whisper something to me that was both infuriating and dangerously thrilling. You don't like your husband, he observed at one point. I saw the way you looked at him when he wasn't watching. It's the look a fox gives a hunter. I don't know what you're talking about, my lord, I said, keeping my voice flat. Liar, he said without heat. But it's fine, I like Lars. They're more interesting. The evening finally drew to a close. The guests rose to depart, and I was relieved. I needed to get away from Shi Jingwei. To think, to salvage what was left of my plans. I rose to bid farewell to the guests, but he grabbed my arm, holding me back. Not so fast, he murmured. I told you I was collecting my debt. I turned to face him, my eyes blazing with a fury I had been holding back all night. You have no right, I stated. He cut me off by placing a finger on my lips. The touch was electrifying. I have every right, he said, his voice low and intense. You came to me, you started this game, now you have to finish it. He leaned in, and I thought he was going to kiss me again, but he stopped, his lips hovering a hair's breadth from my own. Midnight, the Gia behind the lotus pond. Be there. Or I'll tell your husband everything I know about his precious little cousin, including the letter she wrote to an old friend in the Ministry of Revenue. My blood ran cold. He knew about the letter. How? I hadn't even told him about that rod of my plan yet. I stared at him, my hair pounding. This man was more dangerous than I had ever imagined. He wasn't just a powerful nobleman, he was a spy, a manipulator, a man who played games with people's lives. And he had just made me his new plaything. He released me and I stumbled back. He offered me a small, predatory smile. "Until midnight, little spy. Don't be late." And with that, he turned and walked out of the hall, leaving me standing there, shivering in the aftermath of his presence. I didn't know what to do. My plan was falling. The situation with Gu Changyuan was still salvageable, I thought, but Si Jingwei was a whole different beast. He was a force of nature, impossible to predict or control, and worse, he seemed to be enjoying every moment of my torment. I had to go to the Jroden. I had to find out what he knew, what he wanted. I had to regain control of the situation. I slipped away from the rotting guests, Wang, and made my way through the dark, winding corridors of the manor to the Jroden behind the lotus pond. The moon was full, casting silver light over the water. The air was cool and still. The only sound the soft chirping of crickets. I stood by the edge of the pond, waiting. I didn't have to wait long. I heard his footsteps, soft and deliberate, before I saw him. He emerged from the shadows, his face half lit by the moon. "You came," he said, a note of approval in his voice. "Of course I came," I said, my voice tense. "What do you want from me?" He walked toward me, closing the distance between us until he was standing just in front of me. "I want you to stop lying to me," he said. "You think you're the only one playing games in this city. You think your little scheme with the tea house storyteller is clever. It's amateurish. You're painting a target on your own back." I stared at him, my heart sinking. He knew everything. He knew about Master Zhang, about the rumors, about my plan to ruin Gu Changyuan. He knew it all. "You need a better ally," he continued, his voice soft but relentless. "You need someone who can protect you from the consequences of your actions. Someone who can give you the weapons you need to truly destroy your enemies." He reached out and gently touched my chin, tilting my face up to meet his gaze. "You need me." I wanted to push him away, to tell him I didn't need anyone. But the words wouldn't come, because he was right. I was alone, fighting a battle with limited resources and no allies. I had been so focused on revenge that I hadn't thought about what would happen after. What would happen when Gu Changyuan retaliated? What would happen when I had no one to turn to? I said, the words tasting bitter and foreign on my tongue, "What do you want in return?" He smiled, a genuine smile this time, not the predatory smirk he had worn earlier. "I want you to trust me," he said. "I want you to stop trying to do everything alone. I want you to let me help you." He paused, his hand moving from my chin to cup my cheek. "And I want you to stop pretending you don't feel what I feel." I didn't know what to say. I had never expected to feel anything for anyone else. My heart was still scared from Gu Changyuan's betrayal, but standing there, with Shi Jingwei's hand on my face and his eyes burning into mine, I felt something stir in my chest, something dangerous and exciting and terrifying. "I don't know if I can trust you," I admitted, my voice really a whisper. He nodded, as if he had expected that answer. "Then let me prove it to you," he said, still rotting with what I know about that letter. The night air was thick with the scent of lotus blossoms and damp wrath. I stood frozen at the edge of the pond, Sai Jingwei's hand still warm against my cheek. His words hung between us like a challenge, and I knew I had to make a choice, trust him or walk away. There was no middle ground with a man like him. "You know about the letter," I said, my voice steady despite the trembling in my chest. "Then you know it's a forgery." He laughed, a low, genuine sound that seemed to surprise even him. "You forged a letter from your husband's concubine to a minister of revenue." He shook his head, his dark eyes glinting with something that looked suspiciously like admiration. "You are either the bravest woman I have ever met, or the most reckless, possibly both." I pulled away from his touch, taking a step back toward the water's edge. It wasn't supposed to be used yet. It was a contingency, a weapon for when I needed it most. I wrapped my arms around myself, suddenly feeling very small and very exposed. "But you found out about it somehow." Haoxa Jingwei crossed his arms, his posture relaxed but his gaze sharp. "I have eyes and ears everywhere, Shen Yu. I knew about your husband's dealings with Minister Zhou before you were even born. But I didn't know about the letter until my men intercepted a message from your maidservant to a certain tea house storyteller. You should be more careful with your correspondence." My stomach dropped. choir, I had trusted her with everything. In my past life, she had died for me. I never suspected she would betray me. What did you do to her? I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. He raised an eyebrow. I didn't do anything to her. She's a loyal girl. She just isn't very good at hiding her tracks. My men followed her, saw her deliver a sealed packet to Master Zhang's assistant. They retrieved the contents before they could be delivered. He reached into his robe and pulled out a folded piece of paper, holding it up so I could see it in the moonlight. This letter. The one you wrote to the ministry. The one that would have implicated Lu Yunru in a conspiracy with Minister Zhou. My breath caught. I had written that letter as a last resort, planning to use it only if my initial plan to ruin Gu Qingyuan through public opinion failed. It was a dangerous document, one that could have gotten me executed if anyone traced it back to me. And now it was in the hands of the most dangerous man in the capital. You need to destroy it, I said, my voice tight with desperation. If anyone else finds out about it, I'm dead. My entire family could be implicated. He didn't respond. Instead, he unfolded the letter and read it aloud, his voice low and mocking. Dear Minister Zhou, I write to you with grave concerns regarding my cousin's conduct. It has come to my attention that her association with your esteemed office has become a matter of public scrutiny. I beg of you to counsel her on the virtues of discretion, lest her careless actions reflect poorly upon the honorable gentlemen who have shown her such kindness. He looked up, a sly smile playing on his lips. It's very well written, very formal, very incriminating. Give it back, I demanded, stepping forward and reaching for the paper. He held it just out of my reach, his eyes never leaving mine. I'll give it back to you, he said slowly. On one condition. I stopped, my hand still outstretched. What condition? His smile faded, replaced by something more serious. You tell me the truth, the whole truth, about everything, about your Umria, about your plan, about why a woman like you, who seems to have everything, is so desperate to destroy her own husband. I lowered my hand, my shoulders sagging with a weariness I had been holding at bay for too long. The truth, he wanted the truth. I had been lying to everyone for so long. I had almost forgotten what the truth felt like, but standing there, with the moonlight reflecting off the lotus pond, and the weight of my secret pressing down on me, I found that I wanted to tell him. I wanted someone to know. I said, the words tumbling out before I could stop them. He and Lu Yunru. They pushed me into a frozen lake. I was carrying his child. I died. I looked up at him, my eyes burning with unstieras. I died, and somehow I woke up again in my old body, on the day everything started. The day he brought her into our home. I was given a second chance. And I'm going to make sure they both pay for what they did. Ashai Jingwei was silent for a long moment. His face was unreadable, but I could see the tension in his jaw, the way his hands had clenched at his sides. You're telling me you came back from the dead? He said finally, his voice flat. To get revenge on your husband and his concubine. I nodded, bracing myself for his disbelief, for his laughter. But he didn't laugh. Instead, he stepped forward and took my hands in his. His grip was steady and impossibly reassuring. I believe you, he said simply. My mouth fell open. You do, he nodded. I've seen stranger things in my line of work. I've seen men survive wounds that should have killed them. I've seen women with the sight, who knew things they couldn't possibly know. If you say you lived before, then I believe you. He squeezed my hands gently. And I believe you when you say you want revenge, so let me help you get it. I stared at him, my mind reeling. I had expected skepticism, mockery, maybe even accusations of madness. Instead, I found acceptance. Someone who not only believed my story, but wanted to be a part of it. It was more than I could have hoped for. What about the letter? I asked, my voice still shaky. He smiled, a soft, genuine smile that transformed his Roche features into something almost gentle. I'll keep it safe, he said, for now. It's our secret weapon, a last resort. But first, we need to deal with your husband, and I have a plan. He let go of my hands and began to pace along the edge of the pond, his boots making soft sounds on the damp grass. Gu Changjuan is a man of ambition, he said. His career is everything to him. That's why you spread the rumors about his affair with Lu Yunru, to damage his reputation, to weaken his position at the Hanlin Academy. It was a good plan, but it's not enough. You need to strike at the rod of his ambition. You need to threaten his career directly. I followed him. How? He's a respected scholar. His connections run deep. If I try to attack him directly, He'll crush me. Not if you have the right allies. Si Jingwei said, turning to face me. I have access to information that could destroy him. Documents, testimonies, evidence of his dealings with Minister Zhou, but I can't use them myself. It would be too obvious, too political. I need someone else to deliver the blow. Someone who has a personal grievance against him. He looked at me meaningfully. Someone like you. I understood. He was offering me a way to destroy Gu Qingjuan without getting my own hands dirty. He would provide the weapons, and I would wield them. It was a peer-ownership and alliance, and it was exactly what I needed. What do you want in return? I asked, repeating my earlier question. He stepped closer, close enough that I could feel the warmth radiating from his body. I already told you, he said softly. I want you to trust me. I want you to let me in. I want to be the one you turn to when the world gets too heavy. He reached out and tucked a strand of hair behind my ear, his fingers brushing my skin with feather-light tenderness. I want to be your peer-owner. In every way. My heart was pounding so loudly I was sure he could hear it. You don't even know me, I whispered. Really? You've only known me for a few days. He smiled that soft smile again. I know enough. I know you're brave. I know you're smart. I know you've been hurt, and instead of breaking, you've become stronger. That's the kind of woman I want by my side. He paused, his eyes searching mine. And I know I felt something the moment I met you in that alley. Something I haven't felt in a very long time. I didn't know what to say. The words were caught in my throat, tangled up with 1,000 conflicting emotions. Part of me wanted to push him away, to protect myself from the possibility of being hurt again, but another a smaller, more vulnerable wanted to lean into him, to let myself be held and comforted and loved. I didn't get a chance to decide. Before I could speak, he pulled me into his arms and kissed me. Not like before, not a brief, rattling brush of lips. This was a real kiss, deep and full of passion. His hands tangled in my hair, and I found myself gripping his robes, pulling him closer as if he were the only solid thing in a world that had gone completely mad. When we finally broke we were both breathless. I read up at him, my lips tingling, my hair racing. That, I said, my voice was not part of the deal. He laughed. A arm, genuine sound that echoed across the Arca water. He does nod, pressing his forehead to mine. From now on, everything between us is part of the deal. I should have been angry. I should have pushed him away and told him to stick to business. But instead I found myself smiling. It was a small, tentative smile, but it was real. For the first time in what felt like forever, I felt something other than rage and grief. We spent the rest of the night planning. Si Jingwei told me everything he knew about Gu Qingjuan's dealings with Minister Zhou, the bribes, the stolen tax money, the forged documents. He gave me names, dates, and details I would never have been able to uncover on my own. By the time the moon began to set, we had a clear strategy. I would use my position as Gu Qingjuan's wife to gain access to his study, where I could copy his correspondence and gather evidence. Si Jinghui would provide the cover and the connections to get the evidence to the right people. Together, we would bring him down. The sun was just beginning to paint the horizon pink when I finally slipped back into my chamber. I undressed and climbed into bed, my mind still spinning with everything that had happened. Somewhere in the middle of the night, I had found an ally, a man who made my heart race and my knees weak. It was terrifying and exhilarating and completely unexpected. I didn't sleep. I lay awake, staring at the ceiling, replaying every moment of the night in my head. The kiss, the confession, the plan. Si Jinghui had offered me something I never thought I would have again, a chance at happiness, and I was determined to take it. Later that morning, when choir came to wake me, I was already dressed and ready. I had a new fire in my eyes, a new purpose in my heart. The game had changed. I wasn't just playing for revenge anymore. I was playing for my future. Please prep my formal robes, I said to Kyra as she helped me brush my hair. I will be visiting some of the noble ladies today. I have matters of great importance to discuss. Kyra looked at me with a curious expression. She was still the same loyal girl I had trusted in my past life, but I knew now that I had to be more careful with her. Si Jinghui had run me about her carelessness, and I couldn't afford any more leaks. What kind of matters, my lady? She asked, her tone light and casual. Business matters, I said, meeting her eyes in the mirror. Nothing that concerns you. She nodded, but I saw a flicker of something in her eyes, curiosity perhaps or suspicion. I would have to keep an eye on her. But for now I had more pressing concerns. An hour later, I was seated in the private parlour of Lady Wei, the wife of a senior minister, who was known for her influence in the capital. She was a shrewd woman, with sharp eyes and a sharper tongue. I had cultivated a friendship with her in my past life, and I intended to use it now. Lady Shen, she said, pouring me a cup of tea. I must say, I was surprised to receive your visit. I heard you've been keeping to your chambers lately, and the rumors about your husband. She trailed off, her eyebrows raised meaningfully. I took a sip of the tea, letting the warmth spread through me. The rumors about my husband are exactly why I'm here, I said, setting down the cup. I need your help, Lady Wei, and I'm willing to pay for it. Her eyes narrowed with interest. Pay for it how? I leaned forward, lowering my voice. I know things about Minister Zhou's dealings that would make your husband very happy. Things that could advance his career significantly. If you help me, I'll share everything I know. Lady Wei was silent for a long moment. Then slowly she smiled. It was a predator's smile, the smile of a woman who had just discovered a new way to climb the ladder of power. I'm listening, she said, and so, the second phase of my plan began. With Shi Jingyuai's information and Lady Wei's connections, I was laying the groundwork for Gu Changyuan's destruction. I would take everything from him, just as he had tried to take everything from me. But even as I plotted and schemed, there was a part of me that was thinking about Shi Jingyuai, about the way he had kissed me, about the way he had believed me when I told him the impossible truth. He was dangerous and unpredictable, but he was also the only person who had ever seen me for who I truly was. I didn't know what the future held, but for the first time in my life, I was excited to find out. 2 weeks passed in a blur of calculated moves and whispered secrets. I became a shadow in my own home, moving through the corridors with a purpose that Gu Changyuan mistook for wifely diligence. He was too consumed with his own problems to notice the sharpness in my eyes. The rumors had not died down, despite his efforts to suppress them. If anything, they had grown worse. Fed by Lady Wei's network and my own careful manipulations, I had gained access to his study. It was easier than I had expected. He trusted me, or rather, he trusted the meek, accommodating wife I pretended to be. I waited until he was away at the Hanlin Academy, then slipped into his private sanctum with a set of keys I had copied from his sleeping form. The room was cluttered with scrolls and documents, a chaotic testament to his ambition. I worked quickly, copying letters, gathering evidence of his dealings with Minister Zhou. Each piece of paper I tucked into my sleeve was a nail in his coffin. But the most valuable discovery came on the 10th day. Hidden behind a loose floorboard beneath his desk, I found a ledger. It was a record of bribes, payments made by Minister Zhou to various officials, including Gu Changyuan. The amounts were staggering, enough to buy a small province. I read at the neat columns of numbers, my hands trembling with a mixture of shock and triumph. This was it. This was the weapon I needed to destroy him completely. I copied the relevant pages into my own small notebook, then carefully replaced the ledger. I would deliver the copies to Shi Jingyuai that night. He would know how to use them. The days were long, but the nights were even longer. I waited until the household was asleep, then slipped out of my chamber and made my way to the garden behind the lotus pond. It had become our meeting place. Shi Jingyuai and me every night, under the cover of darkness, we would plan and scheme, our voices low and our bodies close. The line between ally and something more had blurred beyond recognition. I found it, I said, handing him the notebook. A ledger, detailed records of all the bribes, Zhou's handwriting, his seal, everything. He took the notebook, his fingers brushing mine. The touch was electric, as it always was. He flipped through the pages, his expression darkening with each entry. This is enough to bring down half the ministry, he said, his voice grim. Zhou is untouchable now. He'll be arrested within the week, and your husband will be implicated. I nodded, a cold satisfaction settling in my chest. Good. Let them burn together. He looked up from the notebook, his dark eyes meeting mine. You're sure about this? Once I deliver this to the Emperor's investigators, there's no turning back. Gu Changyuan will be ruined. He might even be executed. I met his gaze without flinching. I'm sure he killed me once. I'm not giving him the chance to do it again. Shi Jingyuai closed the notebook and tucked it into his robe. Then he reached out and pulled me into his arms. I went willingly, burying my face in the earth of his chest. He held me tightly, one hand stroking my hair, the other pressed against my back. "You're the strongest woman I've ever met," he murmured against my ear, "and I will protect you, no matter what happens." We stood like that for a long time, wrapped in each other's embrace. The night was quiet, save for the soft chirping of crickets and the distant hoot of an owl. I felt safer than I had in Yeros, Kosi o Rams. But even in that moment of peace, I knew the storm was coming. The morning after I delivered the ledger, Gu Changyuan returned home with a face like thunder. He was pale, his hands shaking, and there was a wildness in his eyes that I had never seen before. He didn't speak to me. He didn't even look at me. He went straight to his study and slammed the door. I knew then that the investigation had begun. The next few days were chaos. The household was in an uproar, servants whispering in corners, Lu Yunru weeping in her chambers. Gu Changyuan spent his days in the study, writing frantic letters and receiving visits from men in dark robes. I kept my distance, playing the role of the worried wife, offering comfort when it was expected and staying out of sight when it wasn't. On the 5th day, the men in imperial uniforms arrived. They came at dawn, when the sun was just rising over the rooftops. I watched from my window as they marched through the front gate, their presence a silent declaration of intent. Gu Changjuan was dragged out of his study, his wrists bound, his face a mask of shock and fury. He called my name as they led him away, his voice cracking with desperation. "You! You must speak for me! Tell them it's a mistake." I walked to the window, where he could see me clearly. I offered him a small sad smile, the smile of a wife who was broken by her husband's downfall. But my eyes told a different story. They were cold, vindictive, triumphant. He saw, and his face twisted with understanding. In that moment, he knew I had betrayed him. He screamed my name, a string of curses and accusations, but I had already turned away. The soldiers dragged him out of the manor, his cries fading into the distance. I stood by the window, watching until the last of the imperial rods had disappeared from view. Then I let out a breath I hadn't realized I was holding. It was done. Lu Yunru came to me that afternoon, her face swollen from crying. She fell to her knees at my feet, clutching at my robes. "Sister," she sobbed, "please intercede on his behalf. He is innocent. He has been framed by his enemies. You must believe me." I looked down at her, this woman who had conspired to kill me, who had stolen my husband and my future. Her beauty was still intact, her TARs making her look even more pitiful. But I felt no pity for her, only contempt. "I believe you," I said, my voice soft and gentle. "I believe he has been framed." By her eyes widened, the TARs stopping midstream. I smiled a cold, sharp smile that made her flinch. "Do you think I didn't know? About the two of you? About the plans you made to be rid of me?" I leaned down, my face inches from hers. "Did you really think I would just let you take everything from me without fighting back?" She scrambled back her face pale with terror. "I don't know what you're talking about, sister." "Don't call me sister," I snapped. "You are nothing to me. You never were, and now you have nothing. Your lover is in chains, his reputation destroyed, his career in ruin. Your name is smeared across the capital. No one will touch you now. You're a pariah." She stared at me, her mouth open, her eyes wide with horror. Then she began to laugh. It was a wild, hysterical, the sound of a woman who had just realized she had lost everything. "You planned this," she said, her voice shaking. "All of it, the rumors, the investigation, his arrest. You did this." I nodded, meeting her gaze without flinching. "I did. And you'll never know how good it feels." She lunged at me, her hands outstretched like claws. I was ready. I stepped aside, and she stumbled past me, crashing into the table. I summoned the guards, men I had briefly placed in positions of trust. They grabbed her, restraining her even as she screamed and cursed my name. "Take her to the magistrate," I said calmly. "She is an accomplice in a bribery scheme. She will be questioned and tried accordingly. I want to be there when she's sentenced." It was the final act of my revenge. I watched Lu Yunru dragged away, her screams echoing through the corridors. She would rot in prison, her beauty fading, her spirit breaking. It was more than she deserved. That evening, I sat alone in my chamber, the silence heavy around me. I had done it. I had destroyed the people who had destroyed me, but I felt no joy, no satisfaction. Only a deep bone-weary exhaustion. Revenge, I realized, was a hollow victory. It didn't bring back the life I had lost. It didn't undo the pain I had suffered. It just left me empty. A soft knock on the door interrupted my thoughts. I said, my voice flat. The door slid open, and Si Jingwei stepped inside. He was dressed in simple robes, his hair loose around his shoulders. He looked at me, his expression soft and understanding. He didn't say anything, he just walked over and sat beside me, taking my hand in his. "I hear already what happened," he said quietly. "Avery, you alright?" I shook my head. I thought this would make me feel better, but it doesn't. It just makes me feel tired. He nodded, squeezing my hand gently. Revenge is a difficult thing. It's satisfying in the moment, but it doesn't heal the wounds. It just covers them up. He looked at me, his dark eyes searching mine. "But you don't have to be defined by your pain. You can move on. You can build something new." I looked at him, at the man who had been my ally, my partner. He had seen me at my worst and hadn't turned away. He had believed me when I told him the impossible truth. He had given me a reason to hope, and now, sitting beside me in the quiet of my chamber, he was offering me something more. "Thank you," I said, my voice thick with emotion, "for everything. I wouldn't have been able to do this without you." He smiled, a soft dewy arm smile that lit up his features. "You would have found a way. You're the most resourceful woman I've ever met." He reached out and brushed a strand of hair from my face. "But I'm glad you let me help you. I'm glad you trusted me." I leaned into his touch, closing my eyes for a moment. The emptiness faded, replaced by a warmth that spread through my chest. It wasn't happiness, not yet, but it was a beginning. "What happens now?" I asked, my voice be a relay above a whisper. He put his arm around me, pulling me close. "Now we move on. You have your freedom. You have your dowry. You have a future ahead of you." He paused, his lips brushing my forehead. "And you have me, if you want me." I opened my eyes and looked up at him. He was watching me, his expression open and vulnerable. This was the real Si Jingwei, the man behind the mask of cold authority and dangerous power. He was offering me his hair, and I had to decide whether to take it. I reached up and touched his cheek, my fingers tracing the sharp line of his jaw. "I want you," I said, the words coming out before I could stop them. "I've wanted you since the moment we met in that alley." He smiled, a brilliant smile that transformed his face. He leaned in and kissed me, a soft, tender kiss that promised a new beginning. I kissed him back, pouring all of my hope and my fear and my longing into that one moment. When we finally broke a bar, we were both breathless. He rested his forehead against mine, his eyes closed. "You've made me the happiest man in the capital," he murmured. I laughed, a watery, shaky sound that was half sob and half joy. "You're not so bad yourself, my lord." He opened his eyes, a teasing glint in them. "My lord. After everything we've been through, you're still calling me my lord?" I smiled, a genuine smile that reached my eyes. "What should I call you then?" He kissed the tip of my nose. "Call me Jingwei. Or if you're feeling erotical or bold, call me yours." I blushed, burying my face in his chest. "Jingwei, but only because you're too stubborn to argue with." He laughed, a mubue arm, rumbling sound that vibrated through me. "I'll take it." We sat in the quiet of my chamber, wrapped in each other's arms, watching the moon rise through the window. The night was peaceful, the storm finally passed. I had avenged myself, and in the process, I had found something I never expected, a second chance at happiness. The weeks that followed were a whirlwind of change. The trial of Minister Zhou and Gu Changyuan was swift and brutal. Zhou was sentenced to execution, his assets confiscated by the crown. Gu Changyuan received a lesser sentence, stripped of his title and banished to the northern border. He died within a year, killed by a fever in a millet rye camp far from the capital. Liu Yunru was sentenced to 10 years of hard labor, a punishment that was considered merciful in light of her status as a woman. I didn't mourn any of them. They had made their choices, and they had paid the price. I, on the other hand, was thriving. With Shi Jingwei's help, I reclaimed my mother's dowry, the properties and businesses that Gu Changyuan had stolen from me. I threw myself into managing them, rebuilding what had been lost. I discovered a talent for business, a skill I never knew I had. Within months, my shops were flourishing, and I was becoming known as one of the most successful merchants in the capital. But the real success was my relationship with Si Jingwei. He courted me properly, with flowers and poetry and long walks in the garden. He introduced me to his family, who were dibue rai at first but eventually won over by my charm and intelligence. He treated me like an equal, a partner, not just a wife, and slowly, hesitantly, I began to trust again. I began to love. 6 months after Gu Changyuan's arrest, Si Jingwei asked me to marry him. We were in the garden behind the lotus pond, the same place where we had made our pact. He knelt before me in the moonlight, a small velvet box in his hands. Inside was a simple gold ring, unadorned but beautiful. I don't have a speech, he said, his voice rough with emotion. I'm not good with words. But I love you, Shen Yu. I loved you the moment I met you. I want to spend the rest of my life with you. I want to wake up every morning and see your face. I want to hold you when you're sad and laugh with you when you're happy. I want to grow old with you. He looked up at me, his dark eyes shining with tear. Will you marry me? I looked down at him, this man who had seen me at my worst and loved me anyway. This man who had believed me when no one else would. This man who had given me back my life. Yes, I said, my voice breaking. Yes. Jingwei, I'll marry you. He rose to his feet, his face radiant with joy. He took my hand and slipped the ring onto my finger. Then he kissed me, a kiss that was full of promise and hope and love. We were married a month later in a small, private ceremony. Only our closest friends and family were invited. It was a simple affair, nothing like the lavish wedding I had had with Gu Changyuan, but it was perfect, because I was marrying the right man this time. I didn't know what the future held. There would be challenges, I knew. There would be obstacles and hair attaches. But for the first time in my life, I wasn't afraid. I had Si Jingwei by my side, and together, we could face anything. Because this time, I was living for myself, and that made all the difference. The morning of my wedding to Shi Jingwei dawned clear and bright, the sky a perfect expanse of blue that seemed to mirror the happiness blooming in my chest. I sat before my mirror as Kyra arranged my hair, weaving fresh peonies into the intricate coils. The flowers were pale pink, the color of new beginnings, and they smelled of spring and hope. I watched my reflection, oddly recognizing the woman who Stie read back. She was calm, radiant, her eyes holding a W.A. worth that had been absent for so long. You look beautiful, my lady, Kyra said, her voice soft with emotion. She had been with me through everything, and I had forgiven her for her carelessness. She was loyal, and that was what mattered. The Mame Arquis will be speechless when he sees you. I smiled, a genuine smile that reached my eyes. I hope so, he's seen me at my worst. It's nice to show him my best for a change. Choir laughed, a light musical sound. He's seen you at your bravest, my lady. That's what matters to a man like him. She was right. Sai Jingwei had seen me at my most vulnerable, my most desperate, my most ruthless. He had seen all of me, and he had loved me anyway. That was a gift I would never take for granted. The ceremony was held in the Garden of his estate, a sprawling property on the outskirts of the capital. The grounds were lush and green, filled with flowering trees and winding paths. A small pavilion had been set up for the ceremony, draped in silk and decorated with lanterns. Our guests were few, just a handful of close friends and trusted allies. It was exactly what I wanted: intimate, personal, free of the politics and pretense that had read my first marriage. Sai Jingwei waited for me at the pavilion, dressed in robes of deep blue embroidered with silver thread. He looked every inch the powerful Marquis, but when he saw me, his expression softened into something warm and ungarrotted. His eyes traced my face, my dress, the flowers in my hair. He smiled, and I felt my heart skip a beat. You're beautiful, he said, his voice low and rough with emotion. More beautiful than I ever imagined. I blushed, ducking my head. You're not so bad yourself. He took my hands, his grip arm and steady. Jingwei, he corrected gently. I'm your husband now. You can call me Jingwei. I looked up at him, my eyes meeting his. Jingwei, I repeated, savoring the sound of his name on my lips. It suits you. The officiant began the ceremony, his voice raying over the gentle rustle of leaves and the distant chirping of birds. I really heard the words. I was lost in the sight of Shi Jingwei's face, the feel of his hands holding mine. This was real. This was happening. I was marrying the man I loved, and nothing else mattered. When the officiant pronounced us husband and wife, Sai Jingwei leaned in and kissed me. It was a soft, tense, full of promise and love. Our guests cheered, and I felt TAR's prick at the corners of my eyes. I was happy, truly, completely happy. It was a feeling I had thought I would never experience again. The celebration that followed was joyful and unpretentious. We ate, we drank, we laughed with our friends. Si Jingwei kept me close, his hand never leaving mine. He introduced me to his closest allies, men who had fought beside him in battle and trusted him with their lives. They welcomed me warmly, treating me with respect and kindness. You've finally found someone worth keeping, one of them said, clapping Shi Jingwei on the back. It's about time, Jingwei laughed, pulling me closer. I know. I waited longer than I should have. I smiled up at him. You were worth waiting for. The night wore on, the lanterns casting a blue-arm glow over the garden. When the last of our guests had departed, Sei Jingwei led me to our new chambers. The room was beautiful, decorated with silk hangings and fresh flowers. A fire crackled in the hearth, casting dancing shadows on the walls. He closed the door behind us, and we were alone. He turned to me, his eyes dark the emotion. Are you happy? He asked, his voice really above a whisper. I nodded, reaching up to touch his face. I am. I never thought I could be happy again, but you proved me wrong. He leaned into my touch, closing his eyes for a moment. Then he opened them, and I saw the vulnerability in them. The hope. I will spend the rest of my life making sure you stay happy, he said. I promise you that. I kissed him then, pouring all of my love into that kiss. He responded with equal passion, his arms wrapping around me and pulling me close. We fell into each other, the world fading away until there was nothing but the two of us. The months that followed were the happiest of my life. I threw myself into managing my businesses, and Shi Jingwei supported me in everything I did. He offered advice, connected me with trustworthy partners, and celebrated my successes as if they were his own. We worked side by side, partners in every sense of the word. Our life together was not without its challenges. There were political machinations and social obligations, the constant pressure of being a noblewoman in the capital. But I faced them with a newfound confidence, knowing I had Shi Jingwei behind me. We navigated the treacherous waters of courtly life together, supporting each other through the highs and the lows. After a wally exhausting day of entertaining guests, I collapsed onto the chaise in our sitting room. Sei Jingwei followed, sitting beside me and pulling my feet into his lap. He began to massage them, his strong fingers working out the tension. You're going to spoil me, I said, closing my eyes in bliss. Good, he said, his voice warm with affection. You deserve to be spoiled. I opened my eyes and looked at him. The firelight played across his features, softening the arty edges of his face. He was so handsome, so kind, so utterly mine. I reached out and touched his cheek, tracing the line of his jaw. I said, my voice soft, I have something to tell you. He looked at me, his expression curious. What is it? I smiled, a slow, radiant smile that I had been holding back for weeks. He froze, his hands stilling on my feet. His eyes widened, his mouth dropping open. You're pregnant. He repeated, his voice a whisper. I nodded, tears pricking at my eyes. I found out last week. I wanted to wait for the right moment to tell you. He read at me for a long moment, his expression unreadable. Then he burst into laughter, a joyous, incredulous sound that filled the room. He pulled me into his arms, holding me so tightly I could barely breathe. He said, his voice choked with emotion, we're going to have a baby. I laughed, tears streaming down my cheeks. Mwah. Are you happy? He pulled back, cupping my face in his hands. Happy? I'm the happiest man in the world. You've given me everything, Shen Yu. Everything I never knew I wanted. He kissed me. A deep, passionate kiss that left me breathless. I love you so much. I kissed him back, my heart swelling with joy. I love you too. Jingwei. More than I ever thought possible. The pregnancy was a journey of its own. I was sick in the mornings, exhausted during the afternoons, and ravenous at all hours. Sei Jingwei was a constant presence, bringing me ginger tea and rubbing my back when I was ill. He talked to my belly, telling the baby stories and singing lullabies. He was going to be an incredible father, and I couldn't wait to see him hold our child. The day of the birth was long and difficult. I labored for hours, the pain a relentless wave that threatened to overwhelm me. Sei Jingwei stayed by my side, holding my hand and whispering words of encouragement. He didn't flinch when I squeezed his fingers until they were white. He didn't leave my side for a single moment. When our son was born, I was too exhausted to speak, but I heard his first cry, a lusty wail that filled the room. I opened, and Shi Jingwei was holding him, tears streaming down his face. His beautiful, he said, his voice cracking. His perfect. He looks just like you. I smiled, reaching out a trembling hand. Let me see him. He brought the baby to me, placing him gently in my arms. I looked down at our son, his face scrunched and red, his tiny fists waving in the air. He was the most beautiful thing I had ever seen. He has your eyes, I said, looking up at Sei Jingwei, and your stubbornness, from the way he's already waving his fists. Sei Jingwei laughed, shaky sound. Has going to be trouble. Just like his mother, I smiled, pressing a kiss to our son's forehead. The best kind of trouble. We named him Si Ming, the Che Ractor for bright and shining. He was our light, our hope, our future. The years that followed were filled with joy. We had a daughter 2 years later, a spirited girl with her father's dark eyes and her mother's quick smile. Our family was complete, and our love for each other only grew stronger. I continued to run my businesses, and Shi Jingwei continued his work at court. We were a team, a partnership built on trust and mutual respect. We faced challenges together, celebrated victories together, and grew old together. But even in my happiness, I never forgot where I came from. I never forgot the woman I had been, the pain I had suffered, the strength I had found to rise again. I used my experiences to help others, speaking out against injustice, and supporting women who had been wronged. I became a patron of shelters for abused wives, using my wealth and influence to make a difference. And I never stopped loving Shi Jingwei. I woke up beside him, and thanked the heavens for the second chance I had been given. He was my anchor, my partner, my home, and I was his. One evening, many years, we sat together in the jardin of our estate. The children were asleep, and the night was quiet, the stars scattered across the sky like diamonds. Si Jingwei put his arm around me, pulling me close. Are you happy? He asked. Echoing the question he had asked on our wedding night, I leaned into him. Resting my head on his shoulder, I said, my voice soft with contentment, I'm happier than I ever thought I could be. He kissed the top of my head. Good, because I'm going to keep making you happy for the rest of our lives. I smiled, closing my eyes. The future stretched out before us, endless and full of possibility. I had been given a second chance, and I had made the most of it. I had found love, built a family, and created a life worth living. And as I sat there, wrapped in my husband's arms, I knew that I had finally found my happy ending.